I'm Aonghus Óg McAnally, an actor and artistic director of Rise Productions.
Like many people, Aonghus, I was kind of trying to guess this morning what you're going to introduce yourself as. It's going to be a long list of different things that you do. Great to have you on. And as I've done with most people, I'm going to take you right back. Stupid question. I was going to ask your arts in your family, but knowing your family well, they're kind of going, that's a really stupid question. But more so, what was it like growing up in the McAnally family, you know, with your father and grandfather and, well, you know, that your family basically, was it kind of around you?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I guess with any childhood, you just presume that what you have is the norm. So I remember a friend of mine whose dad was a bank manager telling me about the day his dad brought him into work and put £1 million in his hand. I was going, what? Because for me, that blew my mind. But for him, that's absolutely run of the mill. And so equally for me, you know, the idea of, you know, phone calls from location in Cartagena to say, oh, I was filming with De Niro and Jeremy Irons today from my granddad was kind of the norm too. That thing of, you know, I always talk about, you know, kids waiting for Saturday morning to go and kick ball around the park with their dad. I spent every Saturday morning with my dad as well. He just happened to be presenting Anything Goes on RT at the time, and I was sitting down watching the cartoons along with every other kid in Ireland. So it was, looking back on it now, obviously it's a strange existence. You don't fully have ownership of your parents like that. In that, you know, simple things like, I think when I was 9 months old, my mom went and did this massive nationwide tour of the States with the Abbey. And equally, I remember coming home from a family holiday once and stopping off in McDonald's to get a snack on the drive home before we got back. And literally, as we sat down with our food at the table, an entire coach of school kids on their school tour arrived in, saw Aonghus McAnally off the telly, and each one of them queued up for an autograph, and he sung and chatted and did everything for, you know, essentially 45 minutes or an hour. As we ate our McDonald's, his went cold in front of him, having not had a single bite. He signed the last autograph and went, right, okay, let's go, and stood up and walked out, and we did the rest of the drive home. So it's a funny thing to have to kind of share your family like that. It does kind of get a bit normal. The one thing that really wasn't normal was Ray's funeral, because it was such a big public thing in the program and the TV cameras and stuff. And that's strange, because I was 8 when he died. And at 8, you're kind of old enough to know what's going on, but not really. And having TV cameras put in your face is kind of a strange one. There's a really worrying story about that day. And I know that me saying this out loud did happen. What the truth of it is, I don't know. But I was talking to my cousins, Connor's kids, my dad's brother, about it. And I told them that I was doing fine. And then I saw the TV cameras and turned on the waterworks. Now, whether that's an 8-year-old kid trying to defend himself, just going, no, I'm tough, I wasn't crying, or whether that's the worst ham actor in the history of the world. This is an opportunity. Who knows? The Moiselles may be looking at this. Let me see what I can do. I don't know. But either way, it's pretty concerning.
We'll talk a bit more about, not about that, but talk a bit more about the growing up thing. I mean, was it something that, you know, I just say you were surrounded by it, you know, and there was, you know, it was normal. And was it something that you found yourself, like, were you also that kid among your kind of friends who was, like, did you run away from it? I'm always very interested in kind of going,
No, and I know people do that, but no, there was never any question in my mind but that I would go into the business.
Okay.
100%. And funnily enough, with kind of my dad being as high profile as he was with the TV stuff, that kind of presenting end of things was never of interest. And it was always kind of more my mom's route of theatre primarily. And I think, you know, it's an interesting one to have, because I think the Irish are always great for having a bit of an inferiority complex. And just to have your granddad out there with 3 BAFTAs in his arse pocket emboldens you a bit to go, well, why wouldn't I go and do this? Why wouldn't I want to go and try and take this on? Because you can see that, okay, obviously it's a tough profession at times, but there can be great highs and great successes. And why not dream big and go for it? So yeah, no, from an incredibly early age, it was all I ever really wanted to do. And so I was I threw myself in. And Ray had a great line, which he said to my dad, I don't care what you do, provided you do it to the best of your ability. So that idea, the only real thing that happened, I was never pushed into the business, but absolutely from day one, the concept of a work ethic and professionalism was really, really instilled in me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously to the general public, you know, your granddad and your dad, because they're in the kind of TV and film, but your mum, I mean, you mentioned your mum, like there was kind of, it wasn't just on one side, it was everywhere.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, I mean, that's where it gets crazy. So, Ray was married to Ronnie Masterson, my granny, who plays the granny in Angela's Ashes, had like had a career that spanned 8 decades. You know, famously, they had only just married. They met so my grandparents met on the Abbey stage. My parents met on the Peacock stage. My grandparents are only just married when the Abbey burnt down. And so suddenly you're looking at, you know, a bit like at the moment, you can give like a couple where both are working in the airport. Suddenly you're going, right, no salaries coming in. Like the Abbey fire happens and the two of them are looking at each other as newlyweds going, well, who's paying for the dinner next week?
Yeah.
You know, the only thing I will say, my granny always said, Ernest Blythe, who didn't have a lot of fans, said over the smouldering rubble of the Abbey, no one will lose a day's pay over this, and no one did. So you got to give credit where it's due there. But yeah, you just accept it as the norm, and then obviously on my mom's side as well, because this is the thing: having Ray McAnally as a famous granddad on one side, you go, well, that's kind of incredible. My other granddad is Billy Morton of Morton Stadium in Santry. Clearly, I got the genetics from one side of the family and not the other. My GA playing career will attest to that. So my mum was a member of the Abbey Company. My granny was a member of the Abbey Company. My dad's sister Niamh was a TV director. My dad's brother Connor is a TV director as well. So you were absolutely steeped in it.
Yeah. So, Aonghus, why did you? Sorry. Was there a time then, kind of as you kind of grew up in your childhood, then into your teenage years, that kind of it became, you know, it's one thing having you know your grandfather being Ray McAnally, when you're young, you're 8 and 9 and 10, but when you're kind of 15, 16, 17, you kind of go, holy Jesus Christ, you know, that again, I'm you know, that sense of someone being you mentioned you're on about sharing your family, someone being your grandfather, your father, your mother, but then the public having a whole different relationship with them, that must be a really bizarre headspace.
Yeah, it is. I started working at 15. I started kind of auditioning, so I was doing the standard kind of Gaiety School of Acting Saturday afternoon stuff as 11 and 12-year-old, that kind of stuff. And was auditioning for bits and pieces then. Well, I kind of was auditioning for The Butcher Boy like 2 years before they eventually went into production on it and stuff like that, kind of little things popping up, but never getting any of those gigs. And I'm eternally grateful I never got any of those gigs. Because if you think I'm an obnoxious fella now, I would have been the most insufferable child star of all time. So I'm really grateful that didn't happen. But I did start working at 15. And so worked for a couple of years, like while still going to school as a teenager, and then decided to go and train and did the old acting course at Trinity before it kind of evolved and became the Lear.
And were your mates, sorry, but were your mates like in school, were like, was that known from a very, you know, you mentioned, you know, the other side of your family in Morton Stadium, and I imagine sport was always all around, but like, were you from a very early age viewed as, oh, that's what you're going to be doing among your friends?
Yeah, I was. Now, interestingly, this is kind of weird because you think of my gang of fellas that were growing up in Portmarnock, knocking around the green, drinking cans of cider and kissing girls. Of our gang, there was me, there was Gus McDonough, and Paul Reed. Okay. So I wasn't the only one. But yeah, no, but there certainly was a deal where, like I remember that mid to late 90s stretch where there was a huge push on new Irish writing happening in the Peacock, where on Saturday afternoons when the lads were playing soccer in the park, my Saturday afternoons were spent in the Peacock on my own at a matinee watching those shows. So there was, I mean, yeah, I was kind of separate going, this is me and this is the track. But in terms of coming back to Ray's stuff, I did, after I left Trinity, after I graduated, I went back and rewatched a lot of his stuff, kind of as a grown-up and knowing a bit more about acting at that stage. And holy Jesus, some of the stuff that guy could do. In terms of, like, there's screen presence and stuff that you can't teach. It's just innate. It's there. It's God-given. It's whatever you want to call it. Just remarkable stuff. That opening scene in My Left Foot, where it's this ridiculously wide shot of the maternity ward, and he's just walking down with the beds on each side. And, you know, the camera might be 30 yards away from him. You can see a figure, but that's it. And yet instantly, this enormous presence is there. And you're going, man, that's pretty magical.
Yeah, and it's gas because, I mean, it's phenomenal. And those films at that time, and, you know, I think one of the first stars, you know, of Irish film that kind of broke out and broke into Because you look back and kind of go, oh, Jesus, in that? All right. You kind of, that's, But come into me. So then, when you're kind of, I presume your parents went, well, grand, when you started doing youth theatre and kind of going to the game. That was kind of just like another child going to play football on Saturday.
Yeah, that was all kind of normal. I think the really interesting one for me, the one that counted for me, because like I said, I had started working. Michael Scott cast me in his production of the Cuchulainn Cycle, Yeats's 5 Cuchulainn plays. And we did a couple of runs of that here in Dublin and toured it over to London as well. But after that, in transition year, we did a production of Philadelphia, Here I Come. And I was in the local school here in Portmarnock. We didn't have a tradition of, we do a musical every year or any of that kind of stuff. Like you had one shot, it was transition year, and that was it. And so we do Philadelphia, and I play Gar Private. And my granny came up to me after the show. And like I said, I'd started working professionally at this stage. I'm a 16-year-old kid. And my granny came up to me after the show and she went, yeah, you can do this. And that seal of approval was the one that really mattered to me. At that point, you go, right, okay, this is for real now. And so, yeah, from there, it was like, okay, right, let me go and find where I'm going to go and train. Because I was quite adamant about going and training. And at the time, the Trinity course had just moved from the old 2-year diploma up to the 3-year degree. And so Brian Burrows' year and Lucianne McAvoy and all that, they were the first years to come out through the degree. And they left in the June and I went in the October. But what I used to do was I'd go, we had a half day on Wednesdays from school. And every Wednesday I would go straight into the Beckett Centre, not every Wednesday that it was available, I would go straight into the Beckett Centre to watch the matinee of their 3 big end of year productions, and just blown away by, Conor Delaney there, Brian Burrows there, Lucianne. I'm just kind of going, wow, if this place can make me act like that, this is where I have to train. And mercifully I made it and got in.
Yeah, I was going to ask, very early on, there's a kind of a work ethic and a diligence there to it as well. Do you know what I mean? It's not an assumption, because imagine it's kind of, when you grow up in it, because an assumption that's what you're going to do. But, if you haven't got that work ethic and that diligence, who your dad is not going to take you very far. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think,
I learned that pretty quickly. What it does is, I'm aware of the fact that if you walk into an audition room looking like Colin Farrell, people will sit up and pay attention. If you walk into an audition room dancing like Fred Astaire, people sit up and pay attention. You use whatever it is you have. And if one of the things I have is a surname that makes people go, oh, hang on a second, all it does is it buys me an extra 5-second window where I can grab the attention and go, right, this is what I can do. But obviously, no director is going to cast me on the basis of what a surname is going to look like on a poster. I've got to be able to do the gig. I wish it was. I wish it was the other way. Much easier.
Did you love what you found in Trinity? Did it give you that sense of?
Well, it beat the ever-living Jesus out of me, which now in retrospect I'm massively grateful for, but it was incredibly difficult at the time, because what you have to remember is, as the big fish in the small pond, I swanned into that place as the greatest actor ever to set foot on the earth. Like, I'd been working professionally since I was 15. I had to be better than everybody else in my class. And so I walk into my class on day one and I look across the room. There's Ruth Nega, there's Erin Monaghan, there's Judith Roddy, there's Lisa Lamb, and the list kept on going. So suddenly you're going, oh, there's other people who can do this really well. You go, okay, and I found that first year I found really tough. And they kind of had to really break me down an awful lot and get out of old bad habits. And I remember at one stage doing like a tutorial thing in the middle of first year when I was having a very tough time, really difficult time, because apart from the fact that you're learning this whole new way of working, you're becoming a man. You've just turned 18. And you're all negotiating that whole relationship while still living at home, all that stuff. So a lot going on personally and professionally. And they turned around to me in the tutorial and said, you could walk out of here in the morning and work consistently. I was going, don't say that to me. Like, don't help me out the door. And there was one tutorial that said, look, you're going about as far wrong as you could possibly be going now. I was going, okay. I was like, but you do think I'll come back? And oh no, we've total faith you'll come back around if you stick with it. Like if you stay the course, if you keep putting in the work, these principles will drop. You're not an idiot. You're going to get it. And so that went, okay, cool. And I'll keep the head down and keep plowing away. And immensely grateful for my time there. I just think, I don't think a formal conservatory style training is the only way into the business. I do think it's probably the best way into the business. Certainly it was for me. I'm massively grateful for my time there.
And Aonghus, then the next big kind of traumatic experience is kind of normally kind of leaving that space.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously you've done a huge amount in the last couple of decades. But I mean, I'm not looking for a linear conversation, but I am interested in that.
I've printed off the CV if you want me to read it.
But in that time though, when not necessarily what was the first gig, but like that moment of kind of going, oh, okay, I'm finished. Right. Was that a big thing for you, or did that come naturally?
I was ready to go. I was kind of chomping at the bit. I think we all were kind of going like, being wrapped up in cotton wool and making your mistakes in private is a brilliant thing for those 3 years. But ultimately, if you're training for a fight, you got to get in the ring eventually. And I felt at that stage I was ready to go. And look, this was a different time. So I graduated in 2002. Yeah. So this is, the height of Colin Farrell being Colin Farrell. Irish actors are kind of hot globally. The country is awash with money. You're just about to come into the peak Celtic Tiger thing. And also all the benefits of the Arts Council's move to, as they refer to it, professionalize the sector through the 90s were now really taking hold. So you had professional companies throughout Ireland creating regular work and a diverse kind of work.
Yeah.
And so, not that it was still like the old British rep system, but there was scope to learn your craft on the job. That there were those second age productions of Shakespeare where you're getting to try out that big stuff. There were regional companies, in Dundalk or in Limerick or in Galway or whatever, that you could go and make that stuff. So it was kind of a golden era that there was infinitely more opportunity to get out and learn your craft on the job, but also find a shop window for yourself to show what you could do. And I spend a lot of time working with kind of graduating classes of the various drama schools now, and working with them, I see how much it has changed in that kind of intervening 15, 20 years, that the opportunities are just no longer there. I mean, by my sums, I reckon there's at least 40 or 50 plays a year that aren't happening that used to happen. And if you put it, I mean, even conservatively at 40 or 50, that's 200, 250 acting jobs that you can't audition for. It's 50 directing jobs. It's 150 design jobs, more, so the opportunities are less. But so I came out in 2002, this golden era, and I was under contract from before I graduated for the first 18 months of my time out of drama school, which is ridiculous and doesn't happen to people.
Yeah.
Having got, but brilliantly then, having swanned into college as the greatest actor of all time and then get knocked down again, I now come out and, hey, fully employed for 18 months straight, gig to gig to gig. Like I had to turn down a part in intermission because I was too busy doing a play and a TV show and another movie at the time. Like it was that kind of thing. And I'm going, I'm clearly brilliant. And then there was a TV thing I was doing that they wanted me to come back for another series, and we were shooting in Galway and it wasn't making sense for me. And as we were going back and forth and talking to the agent, I was going, look, listen, if we can't make the deal work, just say no. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? It's not like I'm not going to be working. We said no, instant tumbleweed for 6 months. Just nothing. And you go, yes. Pride comes before a what?
Yeah. Can you talk to me about that first kind of 18 months, couple of years? Because there was, I'd say that a great time, but also great work. It wasn't just the math. I mean, you mentioned, I mean, I suppose in a way I'm kind of looking at your career in kind of two blocks. There's the block of the actor making his way and doing some great work over the first 10 years, and then there's still the actor, but the other person arrived with Rise kind of around like 2010. So let's focus on the first kind of decade first, around and you worked like with the Abbey, you worked with you mentioned Second Age, you worked with Performance Corporate, a lot of work there that was kind of really exciting.
Yeah, I had a really good time. I really enjoyed being just an actor for hire, and kind of going into the jobs. And there were great jobs. I mean, going in really early and doing Plough at the Abbey, Ben Barnes' big production, was magnificent because for me, and I said it at the time, last month I was buying tickets to see Owen Rowe and Kathy Belton, and now suddenly you're sharing a rehearsal room and sharing a stage with them, and that was kind of spectacular. I mean, There's also the family tie-in with Plough, which is, it was Ray's first job when he joined the Abbey to stand in the wings in Act 4 and shout on the sound effects, you know, ambulance, ambulance, Red Cross. So when they cast me to come in and do it, the sound guys got me up to record those as the sound cue. So in that production, it's me and it's my voice shouting on ambulance, ambulance, Red Cross. But also, I mean, famously, the last show in the old Abbey before it burnt down was Plough, and Ray was playing one of the British soldiers. So the last words on that stage, the last words from that show was, "Keep the home fires burning." And that night the place goes up. And interestingly, a year or two ago, as we were going through the last of the stuff from Ronnie's house after her death, my dad rang me, because she lived in Sutton, me and my dad, we both live in Portmarnock. He rang me and said, "Are you at home?" I said, "I am, yeah." He said, "Can I swing by? I have something here, and if it is what I think it is, I want you to just check if it is what it is." I go, "Okay." And he swung by and put a small kind of green leather pouch in front of me. And I opened it up and took one look and said, "Yeah, that's exactly what you think it is." And it's the deck of cards from Act 4 of Plough, as Fluther and the boys are playing, charred around the outside from the fire, which I now have in my possession. However, as much as I would love to, I'm not keeping it. I'm donating that to the Abbey, because I think it needs to be with Mairead in the archive, because that's, you know, it's such an important kind of artifact.
Yeah.
That it has to go to them.
That's so it must have been, I mean, you know, for anyone progressing from watching shows to being on a stage with people is a huge thing. But having that additional layer for yourself, Aonghus, must have been extraordinary. You know, going.
Yeah, it was incredible, and you know, there's a gang of my mates, and we get quite serious about the Abbey. You talk to someone like Ian Lloyd Anderson about what it means to him, even with as much as he's achieved. You talk to him about what it means to play on the Abbey stage, and that concept of pulling on the green jersey. You're playing for the national team. You're representing Ireland. That means something to a lot of us. It's one of those things, the cliche of, "Oh, well, without the Abbey, I wouldn't be here." But genuinely, grandparents met on the Abbey stage, parents met on the Peacock stage. Without the Abbey, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. And so it means an awful lot to me. And even as I worked there more and more, and there was a stage where I did, I think, like 5 or 6 months straight going gig to gig across a couple of different shows, which was fantastic and rare and hasn't happened all that often since, but like a beautiful, beautiful time. But genuinely, every time you take that curtain call on the final show, or final performance of a show, I really savor it, because you don't know when the next one is coming. Yeah. You know, and it means an awful lot to me. But yeah, it was a lovely stretch of time, kind of those Abbey gigs, and we took that production of Plough as part of the centenary celebrations. We took that over to the Barbican in London, and again, to be kind of representing the National Theatre internationally, playing a big stage like the Barbican, with a show that was as solid as it was. You know, they're glorious memories, really lovely. And then the independent stuff as well, working with companies, they say, like Performance Corporation. I'm always very grateful to Joe Mangan. When we did the Nose in Project, that was the first time that anyone had kind of given me like a central role in a play where I had to do all the heavy lifting. Now, I had an incredible team around me of brilliant actors, but that idea of having the concept of having to carry a show, first time anyone ever had kind of placed the faith in me to do that, and the experience of doing that was great. And I think I got an awful lot of confidence. I don't think there's any way I would have had the balls to go and try Fight Night if I hadn't done that beforehand. But also, I had an interesting time on the Nose, because it was, you know, that's a good few years out of drama school. I've been knocking around a while, and I had noticed a kind of an inclination in me to start to concern myself with stuff that was none of my concern in a rehearsal room. And that's a very dangerous position to be in, you know, but mercifully, before it took over and I became the most obnoxious man in the world, I clocked it as an instinct and went, right, okay, knock this on the head, but you're going to need to find an avenue for this. And I think that would have been the seeds for Rise eventually coming into existence.
Go back there a minute, because I think it's gas, when you were talking about the Abbey there, you reminded me of back in a previous life when I used to act. There was I was casting a small part in the Abbey and in the Colleen Bawn, but it happened right in the middle of the Omagh bombing. Happened on the, I can't remember what it was, but I remember Patrick Mason, who was director at the time, brought the whole cast onto the stage before the show for a minute's silence one night. and you kind of go, yeah, it's sort of like, I mean, it just reminds you of the importance of those boards, no matter where they kind of sit, and that national conversation, yes, but also for those of us who are lucky enough to kind of work in this great industry that we kind of work in, the sense of pride that, and without, importance and not important, but important, and lineage, and I think that's a huge thing for everyone. So I can only imagine that the additional layers that of kind of familial emotional resonance that you must feel. But I think it's worth saying that that kind of one has a sense of the Abbey beyond any of the people that have ever worked there, if that makes sense. It's a kind of sense of us as a nation in a way.
Yeah, there's two great things about the Abbey for me. One is a bit like if you ask 100 fellas in a pub, they'll have 100 different versions of what the starting 11 should be for the Irish soccer team and what kind of style of play they should have. And I think similarly, if you asked 100 people in the industry what they think the Abbey should be doing, you'll get, one go, oh, much more new writing, no, much more female playwrights, no, much more dance, no, much more youth, no, much more outreach. Everyone has the sense of ownership of it, and that ownership is brilliant. But you talk about kind of the special lineage of it. More people have won an Olympic gold medal than have set foot on the Abbey stage. So it's that exclusive a club, and that means a lot to me. Now, maybe someone will hear a stat like that and go, well, that's appalling. We should increase access to the Abbey and get more diverse voices on there. Yeah, I get it. But I do think there is an important role in terms of access and bringing new voices to the Abbey stage. But I also think there's a serious argument to be made that a degree of excellence is necessary for the national team. It should be the pinnacle of our ambition. That's not to say you make it an exclusive club that certain people are shut out from, but it needs to be the top of the food chain. Particularly as long as it's getting 50% of the theatre budget nationally, it needs to be top of the food chain.
I think as well there's a sense of I don't know. It's a really interesting wider conversation, not necessarily about the Abbey, but about culture in this country. There's kind of a it's very ingrained with our development politically. It's very ingrained with our development as a society. I mean, poets back in the whatever. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a sense of it being part of some, Yeatsian mythical, imaginary space where everyone has the right to kind of think about it, but the actuality of it becomes very difficult then for so many different reasons. But I think you're right. In relation to from an acting point of view, there is a sense of, that it means something. That it means something to be on that stage. Anyway, I divert slightly. Through those times, Aonghus, you were doing a lot of telly and radio, and so there was a lot of kind of, and how was that for you jumping across those art forms?
Anything that pays the next rent bill is really, really welcome. I mean, I do get quite serious about the art of it and like some of the professional stuff, but at the end of the day, this is how I pay the bills. This is how I feed my kids. So it's important that it functions in that way too. But also I kind of liken it to the idea of a carpenter going, no, I only lay wood floors. I'm not going to do any rafters for you. I'm not going to do any others. I'm not going to do a stud wall for you. I think in terms of what we do, you want to be, in as much as humanly possible, be able to do the full suite of everything and have as many strings to your bow as possible. A, because it keeps the career interesting and varied, and B, because it increases your chances of making a paycheck at the end of the next week.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy the audio stuff, the radio drama stuff, which obviously I've incorporated a lot of into the work of Rise. Yeah. But I do like working on camera as well. I find it a very different medium to stage. I find it very different, not necessarily one I'm as comfortable working in. So I have to work harder for it. It doesn't come as naturally to me. But I find I can do a lot of my best work actually on camera as well. I really enjoy it because there are things you can do on camera that you can't do in a theatre, and equally the stuff you can do in theatre that you can't do on screen. But yeah, no, I never really had any great trouble bouncing from one to the other. I've always just enjoyed all of it because, again, any day you can wake up and make a paycheck being an actor means it's a day that I'm waking up and not trying to make a paycheck selling insurance or working on a farm or being a pharmacist or whatever. I'm intensely grateful that I had this dream and this passion as a kid, and I get to do it for a living. I mean, if you think the kids you grew up with, how many lads wanted to go and play for Man United when they grew up, and how few ever get to live that dream. I'm genuinely living the dream every day, you know, and it's not necessarily about being best mates with Brad Pitt and winning an Oscar and living in, you know, Malibu. For me, genuinely, the idea that I get to be a professional theatre artist, a professional actor, and not have to go and pull pints or wait tables, whatever else, just to do this, that is success as far as I'm concerned. I feel fulfilled, I pay the bills, I get to tell the stories I want to tell. I'm doing all right, you know?
I think it's interesting, you said there about, you know, the different aspects too, but I think, and also maybe to focus now on what you're saying there about when you were doing the nose and starting to get into that stage of your career, kind of going, looking at other aspects of things. And was there a moment you kind of went, oh, okay, I want to try that, or I want to, you know, was that a light bulb moment, or was it just kind of, you know, a natural progression?
No, this is the weird thing. So much is in the same way as I just knew I was always going to go into the business. I always presumed that if you were an actor, you had your own production company, because my grandparents had Old Key Productions because they lived in Old Key House. My parents had Ashley Productions because we lived on Ashley Rise. And we're going, oh, hang on, if they've got Ashley and we live on Ashley Rise, they've got Ashley Productions, I have to go Rise Productions. So Rise Productions as a concept, as a figment of something, was in me from the time I was a teenager, like just the presumption that I would ultimately go on to make my own work. And it was in the rehearsal process for the nose, where rather than just worrying about my own performance, I was starting to concern myself with stuff of even other people's performances. Great plan, not really. Or kind of design elements or directions. I'm going, Engo, shut your mouth. That's not your job. Other people are here doing that job and doing it way better than you will. So sit down and shut up. But I went, okay, I'm now hitting the point where I can't not do that anymore. Yeah. Being the gun for hire was fine and really enjoyable, but I needed a bit more agency over the stories I wanted to tell and how I wanted to tell them, basically. Yeah. And so that would have been towards the end of 2008. And so 2009, the ball started rolling on Rise with the first production coming in 2010.
Yeah. So tell me about that. I mean, that, you know, because, you know, little thing you want to do that requires nothing from yourself really at all.
Very straightforward and easy. Yeah. The line I always use on it is, rather than people starting a theatre company to put on a show, I put on a show to start a theatre company. Okay. So I had an idea in my head for what I wanted the first show to be, and tried to get the rights to it. And they went, "Who are you and what have you done?" I was like, "Absolutely nothing." I said, "Well, then you're not getting the rights." I went, "Good point." Well played. So I went, right, okay, I'm now stuck in this catch-22. And then the very first year of Show in a Bag was announced by Fringe and Fish Amble and the Irish Theatre Institute. And I went, oh, now we're talking. This could be the avenue. And so I applied for that and got it. And that went on to become Fight Night, which was in that first year of Show in a Bag, and kind of put Show in a Bag on the map because it was quite successful and kicked off and kind of went around about, oh, this is what's possible through that kind of Show in a Bag format. I find the Show in a Bag concept brilliant because it was an immediate response to the new reality of that recession, where they, again, you know, making a virtue of, okay, if there's no money knocking around to create shows, and if there's no money around for venues to bring stuff in, let's make small scale, tourable, compelling theatre that people want to go and see. The actors have no work because things are shutting down. The venues have no work because things are shutting down. Let's bring the venues and the artists together and go, hey, you want a job, you want a show, Bob's your uncle. Yeah. And it was a real response to that time, and it made a virtue of the stripped back aesthetic, rather than going, oh, isn't it terrible? We can't have a £75,000 set here. You're going, no, we're going to do it and let it be what it is. And like that was a real, I talk about a baptism of fire. It was a real transformative experience for me in my career. The idea of doing a solo show to begin with was something that never really appealed to me. Despite impressions to the contrary, ego's not a big driver with me. I don't have a big ego. I don't want to be the star of the show. I want the show to be the best it can be. And so the idea of doing a solo show is not my idea. I'd much rather be bouncing off another actor on stage than getting all the applause myself. That's what I'm really there for. I'm really there for the interplay with other people in the scene. But it was a game changer, and it put Rise on the map.
And the development of that piece, because not only is it, performer woman, but like it's the written and developed, it's kind of, it's that, it's a whole other layer to it as well. That's
there is. I mean, look, and it's in the way those movie credits roll. It's by Gavin Costick, based on an original idea by Aonghus McAnally. So I went and pitched it to him. Now Gavin infinitely improved it in many ways. The only thing I have a half-written version of a prototype of Fight Night about a Gaelic footballer, which will never see the light of the day and should never see the light of the day because it is horrendous. Like, it is appalling writing. But GA was a world I understood. I was still actively playing at the time, and I thought I could do it. And so when I pitched it, I said, I won't say GA, I'll just leave it as a sportsman, on the condition that there was one sport, and one sport alone, that I refused to touch, which was, of course, boxing. Because I knew I couldn't fake it. I knew I wouldn't be able to pull that off. But Gavin's dad had been a fighter, and he went, yeah, so we're going to do this. We're going to do it as a boxer. And I went, yeah, because there's loads of sports we could look at here that'd be really compelling. He says, yeah, and we're doing boxing. I went, yeah, because many sports really lend themselves to a dramatic. Just no, we're doing boxing. I was like, for Jesus' sake. So I had to go off and research it. I hung out with Oisin Gale Force Fagan, former Irish champ, serious fighter, and got the lowdown on a lot of the stuff. Brought that information back to Gavin, and Gavin went off and wrote this. I'll never forget reading the first draft of Fight Night in Gavin's kitchen, and I got to the end of the first page, took a deep breath, and by the time I hit the bottom of the third page, I just turned to Gavin and I said, Gavin, is it okay if I say I fucking love this? And he went, no, I think that's probably okay. There's a couple of things from that prototype GA player script that I'd never mentioned to Gavin that telepathically he put in to Fight Night. I go, right, if we are this in tune, if we're singing from the same hymn sheet to this extent, we're onto something here. But then the next problem was looking at it. I was going, this is an exceptional script, and I can't do it. There's no way I can play this. I don't have that in me. Like, there's scenes towards the end of Fight Night where I'm playing Dan Jr., Dan Sr., the mother, the girlfriend, and the 2-year-old son all at the same time. And it's just going dialogue to dialogue to dialogue. And going, I can't. I went, unless there's one way I might be able to do this, and that's if Brian Burrows will direct it. Because I knew physically he could get that to happen. And mercifully, he said yes. I came on board and did an exquisite job on directing that show. But also then I had to go and learn how to fight. Because I'd never so much as, swung a punch in the schoolyard before that. And I had to turn myself into a convincing fighter. And so I had a 3-month training camp where I learned to fight. It was ridiculous. I was very fortunate. A guy called Cathal Redmond, who's now a personal trainer, who was the boxing coach and still is the boxing coach here in Portmarnock. He was a young kid at the time, maybe only 22, 23, and had no theatrical background, but fully got what we were doing. And so he said, look, if this was a real relationship where I was training you up, I would be working on your weaknesses to make you better. He says, that's of no use to you here. We're going to take what you're naturally good at and just polish those up and only have you use those elements in the show. When you throw that right cross, because it will look 100% legit. And it's actually in Axis. We did Kenny Egan, the Olympian, come to see it, and Kenny had a storied history. And as I was sitting backstage, knowing he was in the front row, I went, "This is a play about an elite level boxer who lets it all go because of drink and girls and distractions and whatever else. And now I got to go and perform in front of Kenny Egan. This is going to get real interesting real quick." But he loved the show, and it was great. I think the great thing for me was that anyone with a boxing background who came to see it said it felt authentic, it felt for real. I'm kind of grateful we were able to pull that off.
I'm working with great people. I mean, Gavin, an extraordinary person, and no better writer and dramaturg can work. And Brian, obviously, his work speaks for itself. But then you have a company. There you go. Now you are there. You have a company, and I think the work that the company has done has been extraordinarily diverse, which is the biggest compliment one could pay. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's. Did you find? I have the wheels now. I kind of go. I have a machine.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that you think it has been diverse, because that was always the ambition, that we wouldn't become like, it wouldn't become, so we're a new, so we do site specific, small audience, whatever else. The kind of the ambition, the model, I guess, was closer to Rough Magic, that you could do, edgy new Irish writing, American classics, big Shakespearean stuff, or whatever, that you'd have the scope to do all that stuff. That was certainly the hope. But again, a bit like swanning into drama school as the big fish at the small pond, I came off the back of Fight Night. We won all these awards. We toured around nationally and internationally. This is fantastic. I just have to go to the Arts Council now and go, I'll have $250,000 a year for the next 5 years, please. And weirdly, that's not how that works. And I was shocked to find that out. And I went, oh, okay, right. It was still that catch-22 of not having enough track record. Okay, you've got one hit show, great, but you're going to need more than that. So that's kind of what gave birth to the podcast. The podcast thing was a project that I wanted to do, but also I was aware of the idea that it was about creating content, creating a back catalogue, like proving that you could make the work happen. Not drama for stage, but that the Rise brand would exist in people's consciousness as an entity, as much as anything, to be able to then go and try and get funding down the road. And it took an awful long time. Like, we've only, of all the stuff we've made, the only show that's ever been directly funded by the Arts Council was At the Ford for the Theatre Festival.
Wow.
That's the only one of the trilogy, and everything we've done since has been essentially on a commercial basis. Even when you look at stuff like, even shows like Christian O'Reilly's The Good Father, a show and love well, but we did a 75-date nationwide tour of that without a penny from the Arts Council. That was all just on a commercial basis. But yeah, so in terms of the diversity, we did the initial trilogy of stuff. We started making the audio content. And then after that, we're just trying to find, still essentially it's new writing is the bulk of what we do. But for an unfunded company, new writing is risky as hell. It's phenomenally difficult to do. I do it because I love it, but it's not a recipe for making your millions.
Yeah. But yet, there's a couple of things in that. You're right. And there was a body of work kind of at the beginning, the Fight Night games people play, and all that, through that kind of that trilogy, or whatever you want to call it. And they kind of did very well, games people play, went on. They all had life. I think they all kind of got a pretty good claim, got life, and won awards.
Yes.
Which is, it's not the be all and end all, but in relation to, say, relationship with funders, in relationship with kind of from a commercial point of view, it does help. There's no point in saying it doesn't. But the skill set to be able to do then, I just said I'm kind of jumping back and forth now, but the skill set to be able to do that 70-date national tour, but also to realize the branding thing from an early age and kind of going, okay, I'm interested in this podcast, talking to people, but that would also have, that's a skill set that kind of that's a producer skill set, of kind of knowing the artistic piece, but kind of going, yeah, that's good, and it's also good here. And I think did the podcast, did that kind of surprise you how much it took off?
Yeah, it did. It did. I was quite taken aback by it, and just about how much it meant to an awful lot of people. The idea of anyone who was in New York or LA or London feeling that connection back to Ireland, and just keeping aware of what was going on and who the players were and stuff. I know it was a really significant lifeline for an awful lot of people. And I know to this day, even though the first series, I guess, was 2011, 2012, so it's a little out of date now. But if you're a 17-year-old kid from Roscommon coming up to train in the Lear or coming up to train in the Gaiety, how do you know who Louise Lowe is? How do you know who Annie Ryan is? How do you know who Lynn Parker is? So the idea that you can go and do an hour-long masterclass effectively with each of those people and go, oh, that was their route into the business. This is who they are. Like a cheat sheet before you go in for your audition with Lynn is a really useful resource, And, the idea that now they've got the 2 full series, it's 104 episodes. It's the most comprehensive archive of Irish theatrical voices. The idea that was done, for a tiny company like Rise is kind of amazing. And I'm really glad it's there. But as you say, I was smart enough about what I was doing in terms of kind of the marketing end of it. And I guess that was a producer's brain there for me. And I stole it all pretty much from the world of pro wrestling, where, again, a bit like us, they're all independent freelance contractors trying to make a name for themselves. And how do you work on your branding? How do you make yourself invaluable? How do you get the name out there? But it's funny that you say that, like that was the producer part of my head, because I now see that you're right and that's what it was. But at the time, I wouldn't have called myself a producer. And what's really fascinating to me, the Gate Theatre ran a producer's course not that long after that time, where they brought in all different kinds of producers to talk about how they made work, whatever else. And eventually we came to the session that Michael Colgan himself did with us. Now, Michael's not a man I would have a huge amount of time for personally, but professionally, he was a magnificent theatre producer. Like, that's inarguable. And at the start, there was maybe 18 of us in the room, and he said, hands up, who thinks they're a theatre producer? And remember, this was a course about theatre producing for theatre producers. He says, hands up, who thinks they're a producer? And maybe 5 of the 18 put up their hands. And by the end of his hour-long chat with us, he says, right, okay, who thinks they're a producer? And all of us put up our hands, because what he did for me was he finally articulated that. I think what a great play does is, it's not that it reveals something new to you, it's that it finally articulates something that you've held deep inside yourself forever, that you've never fully been able to articulate. And what he articulated for me was my sense of what a theatre producer is. It's the conjurer who produces the rabbit from the hat. Before you do that, nothing exists, and you conjure this into being. And that's how I see my role as producer. Like, I go, before me there is nothing. And I'm trying to sound a bit godlike here, that's very worrying. But before me it doesn't exist, and I bring it into existence, whether that's commissioning the script or taking an existing script and building a production out of it. But I kind of breathe life into it to collaborate with all these people. And I think that sense of theatre producing is infinitely more useful, certainly from someone coming from my background as kind of more artist, performer, than the idea of, well, I'm just the dude who gets the money and, coordinates.
I think it's interesting as well. I mean, you mentioned a whole other side of your life in the pro wrestling space, which I must say I find completely bizarre. And, where your life collides across that, with Fringe a couple of years back, but even around, like, also, Aonghus, what you say there about not having, before you did Fight Night, not really, that was a genre or but like you have gone recently to, direct, sorry, the name of Kicking All the Boxes with, which again, is in that context. And I think, so fighting has become a thing for you, sir.
Yeah, it really has. It really has. And it's no coincidence that you see so many people who have excelled in the world of boxing or in the fight game, making a go of it in theatre. Even you think, the classic story of Liam Neeson being a very handy fighter and getting to where he is. There is something about I learned an awful lot about how we do what we do in theatre from delving into the world of boxing. That idea of all this preparation or rehearsal for one big event where you have to perform on the night, there's no getting away from it. But also kind of simple concepts of train hard, fight easy. If you put yourself through more in a fight camp than you'll ever have to face in the ring. So like if you're going in for 12 3-minute rounds, train for 36 3-minute rounds, put yourself through much worse in training than you'll ever have to face in the ring. And then when you get in the ring, it's all easy. And so I try and apply that to the rehearsal room now. Whereas if we apply that rigor to the development work and the rehearsal work, if we make it much harder in the rehearsal room than it can ever be on stage, then when you get out on stage, knowing you have all that work behind you, you can just walk out and let it sing. That you don't have to actively work as hard on stage. It can come a bit more naturally. It's more muscle memory. It's more instinctual, I think, if you've done the rigorous work in advance. And I think there's a lot of those kind of principles that I now apply to how I direct. But also, there's something about. So that's from real fighting, that's from boxing. But when you come to the world of pro wrestling, which, spoiler alert, is predetermined and scripted and choreographed. It's a little peek behind the curtain for you there, folks. What I watch in terms of the physical storytelling of those guys and girls in the ring, in terms of how I now direct, has been hugely significant to me. And the one where it really crystallized for me was the Gates production of Beginning. Was that last year maybe with Marty and Eileen Walsh? And that's a play that's explicitly, very deliberately and explicitly about two people talking about going to bed together. And yet, for the first like 45 minutes of that show, there is no piece of physical contact between the two of them until eventually, like, and I genuinely, it's like 3/4 of an hour deep, you have the first moment where their two bodies touch, and it's an innocent little shoulder poke from Eileen to Marty. And it's the most electric, sensual, sexual moment you can imagine, with two fully clothed people poking someone in the shoulder. And it's about building that anticipation. And so I see it in terms of the physical storytelling in the ring. If you have two guys that you want to build to the main event and the audience wants to see those two guys rip each other's heads off, keep them as far apart as possible for as long as possible. Build the anticipation. Make them pay to come back next month and see it. Make them pay to come back the next month and see it. And so now I apply that kind of logic to a lot of stuff. I was directing Carol Churchill's Mad Forest for the American College Dublin, their graduating class, a couple of months ago. And again, applying that principle of for those kind of love scenes, the actor's instinct is to get straight in up and go, I just feel so passionately I want to be close to you. You go, no. Step it back. Keep your powder dry for as long as possible, because then when you give them the payoff, it's infinitely more potent.
Yeah, you're right. I never, I would think long and hard about pro wrestling in the future.
I totally accept it is a very niche interest and it is very fringe and underground, but I think it's one of those things where if I said to you, I'm really passionate about opera, or if I said I was really passionate about drag, or if I said I was really passionate about Kathakali dance drama and how you can take the principles from that and apply to what we do, you go, oh, I can understand how you could study that in college. Let me hear more. But once I say, well, it's two sweaty bodybuilders in lycra underpants pretend fighting, people can switch off. But in terms of the basis of what we do, the basis of good drama is conflict. The purest distillation of conflict is good versus evil, literally slugging it out in the ring. So it's basic and primal storytelling. But the great thing what it does for me is it gives you the fundamental building blocks. It's the DNA of theatre. It distilled down into very crude building blocks, but you can then construct a really robust framework with those building blocks and put lots of ornate touches on top of it.
Yeah. And was that something, sorry, not to dwell on that, but was that something you were into as a kid? Like, was pro wrestling a kind of huge interest all along?
Yeah. The way that most 7-year-olds think that wrestling is cool, I was a fan back when I was 7. Interestingly, the very first pro wrestling school opened in Bray in 2002, just before I left Trinity. And having done 3 years of dance training and movement theatre training and stuff, I went, now that there's a school here, I wouldn't mind actually going and trying a bit, not ever with the view to becoming a pro wrestler, but to go as an additional kind of movement discipline. I'd love to try it out. So I did. I trained for a few months with a guy called Fergal Devitt from Bray, who's now one of the biggest wrestling stars in the world. He's Finn Balor from WWE. So himself and Paul Tracy ran the school there. So I trained there for a few months. And then obviously kind of graduated and went into that run of the 18 months of contracts. And you're going, I can't risk picking up an injury in the ring and not being able to do an 11-week contract in the Abbey. So I had to step away. But when I started the relationship with OTT, I brought Joe Cabray, who's the boss of OTT. I brought him in to choreograph the fights on At the Ford, because I have a real bee in my bonnet that, we're now... Stage combat rarely looks impressive to me because I see what it can be in terms of... It's not full contact in the ring, but there's infinitely more contact in the ring with pro wrestling than the ring that we do. And so I know what it can be, and so selling it for anything less than that kind of upsets me. And At the Ford, the first act of At the Ford is essentially an hour-long fight scene. And so I brought Joe in, who's ex-WWE himself, to choreograph those fights. And the response to people seeing it, going like, I remember like one of the reviews going like, it looks like an MMA fight. Like, it feels for real. And that's because me and Ian Toner were happy enough that we were two young, fit men. We're going, right, we're going to go for this? Right, let's go for this. They're within very safe parameters. But you're able to kind of push the boat a bit, and that level of, again, it's just an additional storytelling tool that we have that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Working with your dad, then, I have to ask you, the great man, but like deciding to produce that tour in 16 and kind of, like it's like I always say, my father tried to teach me how to learn to drive a car, and I kind of went, no, that's not good for us. I'll get someone else to do that. Similarly, was how were you and Aonghus?
Well, what I will say is we're still talking to each other and we're still very good mates. No, it's a funny one because my dad is an exceptionally gifted artist. He's an incredible performer, and did a phenomenal job on that show. It's weird. Again, it was kind of a new diversion for Rise because privately, I'm a man who likes a nice Tom Murphy play, well written on a typewriter, or a Brian Friel play, beginning, middle, and end. Give me a kitchen sink, brilliant, fantastic. I would be less into the verbatim found text, personal testimony, whatever, and I might sometimes belittle that, right? And then here comes Celebrating Christie, which is a verbatim found text, personal testimony musical theatre piece, a bizarre hybrid of all this different stuff, but arguably the most successful thing that Rise has ever done. I mean, if you think it was in the space of 5 or 6 years to go from playing to 50 people in Bewley's to playing to over 2,000 people in the Bord Gáis, that's quite an evolution. And there aren't many Irish theatre companies who played the Bord Gáis yet. But we got the show there. So that's kind of something. But in terms of the relationship working with my dad, it's a tricky one because as kind of producer, director on that and co-writer, I have to be allowed to drive the bus. And the fact is he's the star of the show. And also there's the parent-child relationship where you kind of have to defer to him, but you're the boss, but you're not really. And so it's an awkward one. It's an awkward relationship to try and navigate. So it was tricky enough. But at the end of the day, back-to-back sellout shows and proper sellout shows at the National Concert Hall where you're opening up the choir balcony to stuff everybody in and playing the Bord Gáis, all this stuff. Like that's phenomenal stuff for a small unfunded company like Rise. It's pretty special.
Yeah, no, it is. That's what Buzz, we had obviously in a different kind of context with the Aonghus kind of was out here with us doing the kind of
Johnny McAnally, yeah.
But it's funny because I think there is a sense of extraordinary performer and it's fascinating looking at him now online during this pandemic. I mean, the excitement over his century break in billiards is extraordinary, but the musicianship of the guitar playing is just out of this world. And
that's the thing that people kind of forget. He started off as a rock and roll star. Like he was in Mushroom to begin with, and it was only by chance he was playing in the orchestra of a show, like maybe a panto. But the show was so poorly attended that one day nobody arrived at all, and so the band got up from the pit to play the parts. And the actors got down and played the instruments just for the crack themselves. And Carolyn Swift saw it and said, "Hey, there's a gig coming up on Wanderly Wagon. Would you be interested?" And a bit like myself, if there's a paycheck going, you don't say no. He said, "Yeah, absolutely, I'll do that." And he went in as Fergus the Magic Postman on Wanderly Wagon, and that led to Anything Goes, and that led to the entire career. But he's such a ridiculous man in the best possible sense, in that he's a member of the Magician's Circle. He's an exceptional guitar player. He's done 250 skydives. He's a radio producer, a TV star. But he has so many strings to his bow. How is all this in one fella? And now an accomplished stand-up as well. Like he was on the stand-up circuit for a while with Barry Murphy and all the boys. I'm going, this is getting madder by the day. But he's an incredible, just a born performer. And particularly with that show, I mean, obviously, content-wise, ultimately, you have to come and deal with Christie's death and the battle with cancer, whatever else, and losing his own mother and stuff like that. And it really affects audiences. There's something about the nature of his performance. And also the other thing, because he's such a gifted musician and a very gifted mimic, in the way that those hologram shows for Elvis exist, everyone wants one last Elvis gig and you can't get it. Everyone wants one more Christie gig and you can't get it. But this is as close as you can come, I guess. So I was really proud that he did such an incredible job on it.
Come here, I won't keep much longer, and I'm kind of, because what I was saying, there was a huge, radio drama kind of thing there with the Cobra's Quest and kind of the young, and I must say, like, the Fringe has played a huge part in your career, in your trajectory, and and the brilliance of the Fringe, in Irish framework kind of goes without saying. It's come up in so many of these conversations, but I've kind of I avoided mentioning at the beginning because I didn't want to be two directors love festing Christian O'Reilly's play for an hour. But I think what you said there, though, in relation to relationships, in relation to the pro wrestling, I mean, that text is an extraordinary piece of work, and it's interesting having having us both directed two Northside productions of it in the space of 7 years. And from talking to Christian, I mean, he's an absolute joy. But I think the sense of to be for you, I mean, to start off with, for you to be able to pull that together, from a production point of view, I mean, from a touring, is extraordinary work. I mean, beyond the great production aesthetically you developed, but to actually create a 70-day tour of a show and then do it again. You know what I mean? Can you just talk through that a bit? You know, how that kind of head split happened.
So the play was something I'd wanted for 15 years. I'd seen the original Druid production with Aido Kelly and Darfa Crotty. And okay, part of it is set on Portmarnock Beach. I'm talking to you from 200 yards from Portmarnock Beach. So it's a place that is very special. I was going, A, this is one of the best plays I've ever seen. B, it's set on Portmarnock Beach. I can't not do it. And so the intention was always that at some point I would get to do it with Rise, with me in the role as Tim, and get someone else to direct it. And the more it went on and the more I was kind of bringing directing more and more into my game, I actually went, oh no, this is going to be better for me to direct than be in it. And it still breaks my heart that I didn't get a chance to play it. I'm not going to get a chance to play it now. But it was one of those ones where, again, trying to put the ego on the back burner and go, what's the best thing for the show? And what was best for the show and for the company was for me to direct it at that stage, because I really needed to show people that I was a serious player as a director. And I think thanks to two phenomenal casts, with Rachel O'Byrne and Liam Heslin originally, and then Dan Monaghan and Marie Ruan for the revival, both did very different takes on the show. And it's kind of interesting for me as director because it's my production, but how different a show like that can be with two separate casts, and how much nuance and subtlety you can get into the two versions. Still very much within my production and my kind of vision for it. Beautiful performances. And so I needed to do that. But the idea was at that stage, I had kind of developed this model with Rise of, if the Arts Council aren't going to fund me, let's go punk rock, DIY, grab it by the scruff of the neck and just make it happen. And I had built up a relationship with most of the regional venues throughout Ireland.
Yeah.
And so it's a situation now where I can pick up the phone and say, look, I'm planning this. Would you have an interest? And if it fits with their program, and, obviously if it's another solo show, maybe they have too many solo shows for that season, or too many, whatever, it has to fit with the program. But at least people know now that if I ring you and say, we have a new Rise show, that you're going to get work of a particular caliber, that it's going to show up and it's going to be, and also that it's going to sell. We've done a huge amount of work for a small unfunded company on audience development. Like the idea that I think this year, because of the pandemic, it's the first year that I won't bring a show to the Everyman in Cork since 2014. I think similarly for the Civic in Tala, there's I think also for the Town Hall in Galway, there's places in all four provinces across the border and down here that I've been regularly coming back to year after year after year with a new show. And if you like that, you might like this. And if you like that, you might like this. That kind of audience development is usually only done by the companies that are taking in 250, 300 a year to keep them going over. So I'm really proud that we've had a commitment to taking work outside of Dublin too, west of the Shannon, whatever you want to call it, because I think it's important. And so just having that relationship there with those venues, that they know that they can trust me, that if they say, yes, we're going to show up, we're going to bring them a quality show that the audience is going to enjoy, it meant that I was able to put that big tour together. And as you say, 77 dates over about 10 months between the two casts, it's not nothing. But the elephant in the room and the uncomfortable truth of it is kind of a twofold thing. One, Rise pays actors better than most other companies in the country. I had a show once that we were doing where two young actors were on board. One was coming directly from the Abbey, one was coming directly from the Gate, and I was paying them more than either of those were when they came in. I paid more than I can afford. I pay more than I should, but I'm an actor myself, and I'm sick of us always being the ones to carry the can and go, look, we're sorry, the budget's really tight. Is there any chance you can do it for this, or a profit share, or do it for free, or whatever? Because, unless you're asking the poster printers to take the same discount, unless you're asking the van rental company to take the same discount, why come to me and do it? So I try and pay well. The problem with that is it means that the budget's really tight. If I want to look after people, and I'm going to put them in nice hotels and pay them per diems and pay them a good weekly wage, it means that I end up working 5, 6, 7, 8 jobs on that tour. I mean, there's been times at Rise, genuinely, where I've worked 22-hour days and 7-day weeks for weeks on end. And that's not really sustainable long term. It's an indictment of the ecosystem of theatre in Ireland at the moment. I do it because I'm kind of happy to, and I'm still passionate enough about the work that I would rather, imperfect though it is, I would rather make those sacrifices than not have the work made. It is wrong that the ecosystem demands that of me. That's subsidizing from the bottom up. But as long as that's the reality, I'm going to keep doing it. And partly it's part of that unfair Ponzi scheme where you go, if I can just make one more hit, then I'll get that $250,000 a year from the Arts Council, you know, and I think that's unreasonable for 2 reasons. One, because it asks too much of too many people. And while you might be able to sustain that at 21, 22, 23, to try and sustain it as you're approaching 40 with 2 mouths to feed and, you know, health insurance bills and mortgages and stuff, it's a bigger ask. But also, I'm acutely aware that, you know, particularly with the loss of Carl and Laura's Theatre Upstairs, with the potential loss of Bewley's now if they can't find another home, the amount of platforms and literal stages around Dublin that young working class voices or young marginalised voices have access to is evaporating. And I don't want to be part of a theatre ecosystem that says that unless you have $5,000 in your arse pocket, you're not entitled to tell your story. That's not a world I want to be part of.
Yeah, but no, I mean, you're absolutely right. And we've talked personally long about this. And I think we're at a very moment in our ecosystem with, I just mentioned Carl and Laura, with, you know, the news about Bewley's, with the pandemic that we're in, where, you know, we're facing into something that coming off an old system is terribly scary. But as we've also talked about, Jesus Christ, there's an opportunity here to reframe the whole fucking thing. do you know what I mean? And I think that's an opportunity that really, I think everyone's blood, sweat and tears should be into finding a way of actually mechanizing that or having that conversation. Because you're right, it's not, I mean, we all did it. You know, I remember, like, my 20s, I kind of was looking back at the CV going, geez, CV was great, but I earned no money at all, you know, and you kind of go, that's not fair. It's not fair. If it is to be a viable career, then a career can't be driven on passion. It can't be. You know, it's not
indefinitely. And it's funny, again, this goes back to the pro wrestling thing, the idea that I don't mind a little bit of hardship in terms of weeding out the people who really want it and really don't. But the problem is if that hardship is only financial, then what you're saying is, well, middle-class kids who have a daddy who can bankroll it, or people who are fortunate enough to marry a primary school teacher like I was, you've got a little bit of breathing space there. But we're just going to say to a whole other section of society, sorry, because you're not financially affluent enough, regardless of how artistically rich you may be or how vital your voice may be, because you literally don't have enough euros in your arse pocket, we don't want to hear your story.
Yeah.
Totally unacceptable. We just can't allow it.
Absolutely. And you kind of get into a situation there where, you know, then it becomes, oh, isn't it great that X is getting an opportunity? You're going, sorry, I'm not going to swear on my own interview, but it's kind of like it, but it's that sense that, it's, I think the climate that we're in has unpacked an awful lot of fault lines within our sector, but actually on a very positive side, you go, right, let's sort them now. At least you can see them.
Absolutely, and I think what you're saying is absolutely key. The idea of including diverse voices, that's not us doing them a favor. That's them doing us a favor to enrich the canon. So that idea of like a patronizing thing of, you know, isn't it great that we let X on stage or Y on stage? You go, no, that's the favor to us. It's the other way around. We're the ones that are benefiting hugely from it.
Yeah, but it goes back to, you know, that kind of, you know, a longer conversation, which hopefully will be had, but like about who owns the stages. And then I'm not just talking about the national stages, but I think that sense of, you know, when you're dealing with public money, you're kind of, you're at beholden to the public to make sure that all voices are heard and, you know, fertilize that, you know, you fertilize things and, they kind of eventually grow. Listen, Aonghus, I'm going to leave you there because I feel like another conversation that could take another 5 hours is about to open up. Thanks very, very much for taking part in this. And it was very bizarre from having been a big fan of your podcast over the years to kind of now be interviewing you, but I've got over myself. So thanks very, very much for taking part.
Thanks so much, Mark. Really appreciate it.
No worries.